This video is about markets for recreational drugs like heroin and cocaine, but I want to say a bit about controversial markets more generally. A market is just an arena of exchange, but sometimes people object to the exchange of certain goods, even when the exchange is fully voluntary. For example, although markets for cupcakes don't seem to bother anyone, markets for sex and drugs are often condemned and are illegal in many countries. Many people have moral objections to drug use. The most common objection is that intoxicated drug users may harm other people. If I use hallucinogenic drugs and then fly a plane full of passengers, or get in a car and drive on a freeway, I'm risking other people's lives. Of course, being sleep deprived and using legally prescribed medications can also make us worse drivers, and thereby put other people at risk. This is why drunk driving laws in many countries cover almost any form of intoxicated driving. But why should we have laws that prohibit adults from using drugs in the privacy of their home? Some say that drugs make us more likely to commit violent crimes, but here we need to be careful to distinguish different kinds of drugs. The best evidence suggests that no drugs strictly cause violence, although some make people more violent by reducing their inhibition. Still, if this is the argument against allowing drug use, we'd have to deal with the fact that alcohol seems to be the worst offender here, and that some illegal drugs like marijuana and heroin seem to do the opposite. They're dangerous to the user, but they do not seem to cause any elevated risk of violence. The other moral objection to drugs is that drugs harm the user, at least when they're taken in high doses or over long periods of time. There's no doubt this is true for some drugs, but it's also true for lots of legal actions, like playing rugby, staying in a bad relationship, or having lots of casual sex. All of these are dangerous for the individual, but unlike harmful drug use, all of them are legal. But even if we agree there are moral reasons not to use drugs, it doesn't necessarily follow that making them illegal is the right course of action. Most countries around the world have enacted laws against recreational drug use, but these laws don't always work well, and they're expensive to enforce. This is because illegal markets, also known as black markets, tend to arise whenever governments forbid something that people strongly desire. Economists say in this situation that demand for a good is inelastic, meaning demand doesn't change much even when the price changes. In other words, because many drug users want drugs, regardless of price or legality, black markets tend to emerge. Demand for sex and drugs is inelastic because they're intense sources of pleasure that are difficult to find substitutes for. Demand for kidneys and medical procedures is inelastic because without them, we're likely to get sick and even die. Another feature of black markets is that they tend to encourage violence and corruption. Since people who sell goods illegally can't use the courts to enforce contracts and resolve disputes, they must resort to violence to police their contracts. Predictably enough, this can lead to dramatic increases in gang violence and organized crime. For example, in Mexico alone, more than 100,000 people were killed in the drug war between 2006 and 2016. Even if drug prohibition reduces the use of a particular drug, there can be unintended consequences. For example, when US President Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs in the 1970s, he initially targeted heroin. That caused the relative price of heroin to rise sharply, which caused many users to shift to alternatives like cocaine. When cocaine was targeted, the price increase sent signals to producers to invent a new and deadly version of the drug called crack cocaine. When harsh penalties for crack were created, users switched to a cheaper and even more dangerous drug, crystal methamphetamine. And now that other drugs, including prescription opiates, are being tightly regulated, users in the United States are switching back to heroin. Economists call this the substitution effect. As the relative price of a good like heroin goes up, users switch to a substitute good like cocaine and meth. This means crackdowns on a particular drug don't stop drug use, but they do motivate users to find alternatives, and they motivate producers to create new kinds of drugs. The fact that laws against drugs don't always achieve their desired effects doesn't mean that all such laws are illegitimate. After all, the fact that there are some murders, even when murder is outlawed, doesn't suggest we should legalize murder. But the substitution effect and the criminal gangs that tend to dominate black markets should make us think about costs and alternatives, including legalization. In Portugal, where all drugs have been decriminalized, drug addiction is down, drug-related violence is way down, but one-time use is up a bit. PPE approaches important moral issues by incorporating economic insights into our assessment of whether a morally dubious activity should be regulated by law. A good PPE student asks, compared to what? When various policy alternatives are on offer, including throwing drug users in prison versus encouraging them to enter treatment centers, Social scientific evidence about what is likely to work and at what cost will be relevant to our moral assessment of what we should do about controversial markets.